multimodal exchange passage or transport corridor, or transport corridors, depending on how you look at it, which starts from India, goes to Russia and onwards to Europe, but it connects also with Iran and across the Central Asian region. And I think connectivity issues, what we're discussing today, is more important than ever. If you look around in the media across the world, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of disconnectivity, and really the INSTC and trade corridors like this one promote international cooperation.
A few words about India's role in South-South cooperation. There's a leading role in Indian foreign policy in terms of its role in global South. India has been helping and assisting many developing nations because of its expertise, because of its experience. It went through the same, poverty reduction policies or practices, and so it was ready to share its own experience with other countries. India is also emerging as a kind of global power, especially under the Modi's government. Now, I assume that INSTC, I argue that the INSTC can be seen as an example of South-South cooperation. Although there might be a kind of a distinction in terms of geographies, INSTC's focus is on Eurasia, but I'm sure that there will be little doubt about India's South-South cooperation priorities or investments in terms of geography, that there's an overlap between India's South-South cooperation and the INSTC, because many of the countries that we just mentioned, like Afghanistan, receive development assistance and investments from India in terms of building the roads, building the infrastructure, the social project, and things like that. So there's a kind of an overlap, which means that there's a lot of opportunities in terms of realizing this infrastructure improvement, investments and trades and things like that. The last section about how we can get some insights, learn some insights from the SSC 3.0 framework when we evaluate INSTC itself. If you remember, the first trend was about the pragmatism that Mosley mentions in her argument. The first trend suggests that there is a kind of stronger framing in geostrategic pragmatism as a kind of a major trend in South-South cooperation, broadly speaking. It's not about India, it's not about only China, it's about broad trend. In recent years, in the third timeline, the countries, the developing nations, including the emerging economies, they're focusing on not lofty ideals, rather they're focusing on outcome. They're asking the question, what is the need for me, for my nation, for my national interest, for my economic development and things like that. India is not an exception from that discussion. So there's a kind of results-oriented diplomacy rather than suggesting the principles of solidarity, third world-based arguments. Now let's look at the INSTC from that perspective. Of course, there are some economic opportunities that are sought by the Indian government. There are some geopolitical gains, geopolitical pragmatism from the perspective of Indian government in terms of like expanding trade connectivity, alternative routes to Central Asia, bypassing to Pakistan, an export promotion that will help the India to develop its own economy. There are several documents, official documents, where we can see that there's an emphasis on these aspects rather than on lofty ideals of the third world countries, which exist in the SSC 1 and SSC 2.0 timeline period.
About the Iranian synergic role in reality and challenge, in North-South corridor and Chabahar, Central Asia, as I argued, I will show in maps also that Iran has a unique role. There is no alternative. There is a missing connecting south to north. It is 460 railway. It connects Rasht and Zali to Astara. Bandar Abbas is a usual port, not oceanic port. Chabahar is an oceanic port. So ships with more than 100,000 tons, they can stop there. We believe that if Chabahar, Mashhad, Sarax railway was built, the Central Asia country can have connection both to Pakistan, to China, to India, 3 countries. It is beneficial for all countries. And Afghanistan, you know. So we are not considering BRI and INSTC as a geopolitical different corridor. We believe that, at least in my paper, I tried to prove that it is complementary if we look it in grand outlook. And as I argue that Iran is very economically very good country from 3 parameters: cost, time, and security.
Iran, of course, invested a lot in building a railway line to the port of Chabahar, connecting it with the international corridor. At the same time, India maintains an interest in this transport corridor, continuing work in the port of Chabahar. Even before the withdrawal of the foreign troops from Afghanistan in March 2021, India proposed to include this transport hub in the international corridor. In October last year, Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar repeated this proposal during his visit to Armenia. At the same time, India's position was influenced not only by the development of the situation around Afghanistan, but also by the accident of the evergreen container ship in the Suez Canal in March 2021.
Constitution of the Kyrgyzstan says in the first chapter, in the first statement, it says that Kyrgyzstan declares itself a democratic country. Okay, and for many countries, this is just the text. Okay, this is the text that you have to have in your constitution. Just words, nice words. But for Kyrgyzstan, this hasn't been nice words for several years. As you see there, for about 20-something years, Kyrgyzstan was considered to be a semi-democracy. As you see the yellow spot there, this is the graph made by the Freedom House, the US-based organization that does the research on the state and level of democracy and freedom all around the world through its own methodology, and comes with this kind of chart, okay, and categorizes the countries into 3 groups: democratic, meaning free countries, and partly democratic and non-democracy, it means authoritarian. If you look at India there, it's green, it means it's democracy. It has been the largest democracy. Why we should talk about democracy is that the rule of law preserved. You know, judicial branch of government functions independently in such case, or at least in theory it functions independently. Otherwise, you will have tons of problems when it comes to problems or further on with the implementation of this project.